Hey, fantasy gamer, it's the middle of March, and you know what that means. Fantasy baseball is here, and your Yahoo crew is going to get you up to speed, get you ready to draft, get ready to build that championship season. Let's jump right into it. You need some value picks. You need some good ADP targets for late in the draft. Dalton, tell us about an infielder you like.
Paul Goldschmidt, he's a boring veteran who's clearly on the downside of his career. But Goldie is now hitting cleanup in the Yankees lineup, and he goes from Busch to Yankee Stadium, which has boosted homers for righties by 20% over the last 3 seasons. Goldschmidt still had a 113 WRC plus on the road last year, but his slugging percentage dropped 70 points at home, and now he'll be hitting in baseball's second best park for right-handed power. He even adds 10 bags from the first base position. Goldschmidt's projections are nearly identical to Josh Naylor's, who goes 100 picks earlier in Yahoo drafts.
Yeah, even give you another target in that offense. Austin Wells, their catcher, might open the season as the leadoff hitter, especially if you only need one catcher in the Yahoo format, man. There's a great late target. I'm going to go with Tyro Estrada as my late player to focus on. His injured season in 2024 doesn't matter to me. He had 28 home runs and 44 steals in the two prior seasons, and he trades at San Francisco graveyard, at least offensively, beautiful park, but just a really tough place to hit. He goes to Colorado, probably bat fifth when the season opens, and just a giveaway right now. You can get him well outside the top 200 in Yahoo. We have an infield bias on this sleeper part of the show. Andy, take us home.
That was a good call by you, by the way. I feel like almost everybody in Colorado is kind of sleeping right now. I'm going to go Xavier Edwards. He goes well outside the top 100 picks in Yahoo drafts, around pick 120. He's coming off 70 games in Miami in which he hit 328. He stole 31 bases. Was it a crazy fluke? No, I don't think so. He was a career 313 hitter in the minors, had an on-base percentage of 385. Also had multiple 30 steal seasons in the minors. So I think everything he did last year is pretty consistent with what he has done as a professional at other levels. He's making noise already about trying to steal 60 this year. And listen, he's probably not going to get there, but 40, 45, it's very much in play.
And you see a lot of the times with these losing teams that the Marlins are going nowhere in the NL East, that sometimes they have a YOLO approach on the base pass. Just
Yeah.
they need something to sell, right? So Edwards is going to hit leadoff, and then think they're going to let him run as much as he wants to. If I had not, if you had not beat me into the document and the players we were picking, it's very well I could have gone with Xavier Edwards. Dalton, you on board with Edwards too? We all sticking with Trident here.
Yeah, a lot of speed. I've been targeting him as well. It takes the right build, not a lot of power there, but he's going to help you in batting average as well. So I'm on board with Edwards.
So we just gave you three recommendations on hitters. You're probably saying, well, what about the pitchers? We got to draft some of those too. Andy, what's your overview on the pitching landscape this year?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty radical with respect to pitching, and it's not like everybody drafts it the way I do, but I tend to think of pitchers as something like running backs in fantasy football, but only if running backs were much more fragile than they actually are, right? Pitchers accounted for 74% of all days lost to the injured list last season. That is where all the injuries are, and it's where all the risk can be found in fantasy drafts. Also, like only four guys in the majors pitched 200 innings last year. None of them reached 210. So we're not getting significant impact from these guys in terms of their percentage of our total innings. So generally, I don't draft pitchers inside the top 100 picks. And again, I know that's not for everyone, but I don't mind starting a pitching staff with somebody like Roki, like Sonny Gray, like Hunter Brown, Hunter Green, Justin Steele, someone like that. I'll build out from there. The other thing about pitching is that we're all drafting Paul Skeens near the top this year, if not at the top of the ranks. He was a May free agent ad in Yahoo leagues last year, in most of them. Like, pitching does come into the league. You don't necessarily need to feel that you've finished off your pitching staff for your fantasy roster when you leave the draft.
Yeah, you mentioned Hunter Brown, by the way. People should notice what he did for the last 4.5 months after he figured it out. He looked like a possible ace and somebody I'm going to try to draft as much as I can. I'm also going to try to draft a lot of Seattle Mariners. I've realized that George Kirby was an early spring training casualty. He will not be ready to open the season, but Seattle Park is just the worst place to hit in all of Major Leagues, the worst place to score runs. Even with Kirby down, I think anybody on the Seattle staff makes a lot of sense. And I will be sitting out Skeens. I will be sitting out Scooble. They're great. But I think a lot of these B plus pitchers could maybe take a step. The list of pitchers from like 6 to 20, I don't see that big of a difference with those guys. So I'd like to grab a couple of them, and whoever is ranked 15th or 18th, why couldn't they be Cy Young candidates? I think that's totally in play. But every one of my teams is going to have a Seattle Mariner. That's really the biggest takeaway I want to give. And you can kind of be not proactive with pitching, but just tick them off every 3 or 4 rounds. Maybe take a pitcher, and there'll be plenty of upside guys to take late in your draft. Dalton, I know you're a guy who thinks a lot about pitching. You've already written a lot about it over at Yahoo. What are you doing this year?
The home road splits were wild for Seattle pitchers last season. Safeco Field played more extreme for pitchers as Coors Field did for hitters last season. So totally agree with you there, P. For me, it just maybe it's a cop out, but it depends on what league I'm playing. Some higher stakes leagues, pitching goes incredibly early, and you need to act accordingly. In my home league, it's fine to wait. In general, I totally agree with Andy that no starter screams he must go in the first round these days. Used to be 300 plus Ks you'd get. It's just not the case in today's baseball. And there are plenty of options in the middle rounds capable of just destroying their ADPs. Pitchers suffer so many injuries, so volatile, but drafting the wrong ones will just kill your ratio. So I'll leave you with remember to target skills and simply, I just flat out ignore ERA and preferably on teams that are going to win games and help you get the wins in that category as well.
Do you have a go-to metric or something that maybe we didn't use 20 years ago when you're trying to figure out what pitchers to take?
The K minus walk ratio and CSW are just the real simple and dirty answers. I like Sierra as an ERA indicator, but I legitimately don't even look at last season's ERA whatsoever. I look at if they strike out batters and if they limit the walks and go from there.
And I'd also like to tell you that we have some improvements, some stat improvements coming to the Yahoo game. Some of it will be a premium product this year. You'll want to check that out. Really just the best version of the game we've ever rolled out. And also shout out to T-Mobile Park, which is now what Safeco Field is called. If you asked me to name all 30 ballparks, I'd be like, oh yeah, Fenway and Wrigley, but I'm sure I'd get some of the names wrong. Yeah, I still don't know what they're calling San Francisco's park. Is that still a destination park for our pitchers? I talked earlier about Estrada getting out of San Francisco. Dalton, you follow the Giants closely. How does that park play these days?
Huge pitchers park still. Even after changing the dimensions, it just destroyed right-handed power. Even it's historically been the toughest place to homer for lefties. That's what makes Barry Bonds the GOAT. But the problem there, and people show overlapping homers of Adames. All his homers would have left the park in San Francisco. The problem is the air density is dramatically different by the bay. So those balls that Adames hit simply won't travel as far. That's the problem. So San Francisco remains an elite place for pitchers.
Yeah, it's a little known fact that when we hired Dalton at Yahoo, it was his essay on air density that actually tipped the scales. So people knew that we were getting a meteorologist. Brad Evans was a previous meteorologist in his Yahoo days. So you need to talk about the weather. Dalton is your go-to. All right. Here's a guy who might be pitching this year, Shohei Ohtani. Last year, he did a lot of hitting. He had a season we'd never really heard from before, 50-50. He almost got to 60 stolen bases. I don't know if that's going to be repeatable this year. When you sit down to draft, obviously, if you have a later pick, you won't be getting Ohtani. If you're in a salary cap draft, any player is possible for you. We have to have a talk about baseball's unicorn. Dalton, what's your state of the Ohtani address?
Ohtani's been surpassed by Bobby Witt in recent drafts I've been in. A couple issues here. He's going to be delayed as a pitcher. Also, the shoulder injury as a hitter, stolen base regression. Manager Dave Roberts recently just said, expect fewer at-bats and steals. "Quote, unquote, he needs to pitch and save his legs." But Ohtani did nearly go 60-60 last year. Aaron Judge has health questions himself. Ellie De La Cruz has stolen base regression as well. So for me, Ohtani settles in at number 2 at worst for me. But I'm not going to fight anyone who wants to take Bobby Witt now atop their draft boards.
Yeah, Witt's at the top of my draft board. I just like a player who's younger, still on the escalator. I don't want to hold it against Ohtani, but what he did last year is just an unrepeatable outlier. And remember, when you're drafting him as a hitter, you don't get the pitching. He's two different players in Yahoo. Just makes me a little bit nervous. And I've never seen a team in baseball, and part of this is because the playoffs are expanded, of course. But the Dodgers are already in the playoffs. I can't see how they would miss with the depth of their roster. And what does that mean? I think it means 6 months of load management. Only 2 players on this roster last year got past 90 innings pitched. I think that extreme approach is going to maybe filter into the offense where it's like, why does Mookie Betts need to play 155 or 160 games? Why does Ohtani need to play as much as he did? And I'm just afraid the stolen base regression is going to be gigantic. He didn't come anywhere close to 59 steals until last year when he was kind of gunning for them. He was hurt a lot in his Angels days, several trips to the IL. So Bobby Witt's my number 1 pick. And I know it's going to look bad if Ohtani has another MVP season, but I just like a younger player who may be a little bit more durable and maybe needed for a full schedule when Ohtani isn't. Andy, let's hear from you. What do you think of Ohtani this year?
Yeah, listen, I'm obviously not going to bat an eye if somebody wants to take Bobby Witt ahead of Ohtani, but I will just say Ohtani was first in the majors in runs last year. He was second in homers. He was second in RBI. He was second in stolen bases. He was fifth in batting average at a time that nobody's hitting over 300, right? So that's not just being a five category fantasy asset. That's like you're at or near the top of the leaderboard in all five categories. Led the NL in three of the five standard hitting stats. And again, top five and everything else. And he went 50-50. I mean, this is the rarest combination of batting skills that we've seen. His best case is better than everyone else's best case. I guess that's what gets me. Even if he doesn't run as often, let's say he runs half as often, a third. Let's remember that he's successful almost every time he tries to steal. So if he wants to, if he wants to run 25 times, he's stealing 24 bags. If he wants to run 35 times, we're getting 34 bags. It's not even guesswork when he takes off. So he's still my number one. Again, it's close with Witt, and I don't, it's almost a coin flip.
Just want to point out that his high in stolen bases before last season was 26. I just worry that the Dodgers are going to think it's just not worth it. Why steal second
Yeah.
base against the Rockies on May 15th? Dalton, what would be a good stolen base projection for Ohtani this year?
Yeah, maybe 30, I'll say. But I hear what Andy's saying. What a unicorn. And we haven't even brought up the fact that the guy is an elite arm when right as a pitcher, too. I mean, I
Yeah.
called Bonds the GOAT earlier, but I mean, we're looking at maybe the best baseball player to ever play right
Does that
behind
make you,
Ohtani.
though, when you're drafting Ohtani batter, does it make you nervous that we might see Ohtani pitcher this year?
Last year was perfect scenario, 100%, that he didn't have to concentrate on pitching. In hindsight, obviously, we saw nearly 60 seasons. So, yes, I think it's even Dave Roberts flat out said with him concentrating on pitching, he's going to see fewer at bats and fewer steals. But the question is, how much is that going to regress, as you like to always point out, Pino?
All right. So now we're going to talk rookies. And Dalton, as usual, you have cheated and taken somebody with professional experience who shouldn't be a rookie. But tell us about Roki Sasaki anyway.
Roki Sasaki, there's obvious signs of risk given he said that a doctor once recommended Tommy John surgery. But that was years ago, and his arm is sure looked healthy this spring, fellas. I mean, Sasaki's stuff simply looks filthy. And while he'll obviously have an innings limit, he's also likely to rack up wins while pitching for the Dodgers. Sasaki looks like he's going to provide ace numbers when on the mound, and he's the favorite to win Rookie of the Year for a reason.
I can't deny any of that. He's one of those players I just think you need to have a share of because he's going to be so much fun and he's polished. He's younger than a lot of these Japanese pitchers who've come over in the middle of their careers. He's still on the upswing. Dalton, what type of innings do you think we'll see? 110, 115? I forget what Yamamoto got to last year, but give us a projection on innings for Sasaki?
I mean, I think we could approach 140-ish, and that's going to be very, very valuable, especially when no one throws more than 200 these days. But maybe I'm being optimistic with that, but I think we can get 140 out of Sasaki this season.
So when it comes to rookie optimism, true rookie optimism, not rookie Sasaki optimism, as Dalton has cheated, as I pointed out, it's often I can't talk about the Red Sox. In fact, a lot of times I'm the person in my league who doesn't draft the rookies, but they have such a great farm system. How did they get Garrett Crochet and not have to trade Christian Campbell or Roman Anthony or Marcelo Mayer? And even though Anthony is the number one prospect on a lot of boards, I know Keith Law has him number one overall, some other people do. Campbell's 2 years older, and he has maybe more ways into the lineup with injuries might hit. He might play some second base, he might play some center field. He's got an elite batting eye. He's going to hit for a high average, I think, right away. I think he's going to steal right away. He's going to be a double-digit home run guy. He may not be somebody you draft. He may not even break the season with the big club. But the moment they promote Campbell, and he's going to play in the majors this year, I want you to have him. If you have a league that you can stash a prospect, he's a perfect guy. Or in a mixed league where maybe some of these guys aren't drafted, you don't make the major league team the day you hear about it, I want Christian Campbell on your team. Andy, what do you got for us?
Well, first of all, Scott, like it's wild that Boston has basically three of the top 10 prospects in baseball right now. They're all at like AAA. And Campbell, I think you're right to call out Campbell because he's going to be eligible almost everywhere, right? He has positional versatility. You can slot him all kinds of places. So great system. For me, I just feel like we got to talk about Dylan Cruz a little bit. It was a struggle for him for a bit in his first taste of major league pitching, right? But I don't think that should discourage anyone. He has a history of adjusting really well at every level he's visited. He eventually hits for average and he lives on base. Batting average is something that is harder and harder to find in the current era. So I think Dylan Cruz has a real chance, to hit, if not 300, 285, 290, something like that. He's off to a scorching start in the spring. So no worries there. Guy stole 12 bases for the Nationals last season in just 31 games, and he's talking 40 steals this year. Again, that's just a player talking, but it does seem like a pretty reasonable number for him in the current era in which it's very easy to steal bases. And again, this final thing with him, nobody hits for average. And if he can give us like a 290 season with 30, 35 steals, that's enormously valuable.
I don't know how deep that Washington lineup is, but right now it looks like Cruz is going to bat second and Wood is going to bat third. So a couple of young up and comers in at least the top of that lineup should be pretty good. And I think Cruz is probably going to hit the ground running in 2025 against somebody I don't want to be locked out of. Okay, so maybe rookies aren't your thing, but maybe you like younger players. They've been a little bit experienced, have gotten their feet wet, and perhaps they're ready to jump a level. Andy, give us a breakout candidate for 2025.
Yeah, this for me is Wyatt Langford. And we can argue that Langford actually broke out last September, right? He delivered a huge percentage of his season-long stats, like basically in a single month. It was 8 homers, it was 7 steals. He hit 300, OPS near 1,000. For the year, 16 bombs, stole 19 bases. He's just 23 years old, and he absolutely raced through the minors. He hit 351 with a 469 on base percentage, along with power and speed in the minor leagues. He just checks all the boxes. And again, he was pretty much a cartoon in the minor leagues. I mean, didn't experience trouble at any level. I just view him as a potential 5 category fantasy star. I think he's the sort of player who could plausibly find his way into the first round of fantasy drafts in 2026. I don't know that that's going to happen, but I always tend to take him a little bit higher than ADP.
My breakout candidate is a little bit older, but Tyler Soderstrom of the Athletics. They've changed parks. Oakland was a horrible place to hit. I don't know exactly how Sacramento will play, but it will be a better place to hit than Oakland was. Last year, Soderstrom 9 home runs in 61 games. He's no longer burdened with catching, although maybe he'll pick up the odd game or two here behind the plate, but mostly just a first baseman DH. These are the cheapest 20 to 25 home runs you can find in your draft, just a giveaway. He might be your last round pick in a lot of mixed leagues. He might even be a waiver wire addition, but I'm really in this on the Sacramento thing too. The Oakland team, I wish they stayed in Oakland, but I think they can maybe be this year's Tigers, be around 500, be in the cusp of playoff contention. And Dalton, you're going to say some nice things about the Yankees.
My breakout candidate is Jason Dominguez. He held his own as a 21-year-old in the majors after tearing through the minors last season. That was while returning from Tommy John surgery. Dominguez has racked up 6 homers, 6 steals over just 87 career at-bats in the majors. Yankee Stadium has boosted homers an AL high 19% over the last 3 seasons. Dominguez is locked into a regular role now with Juan Soto moving across New York. He's even a candidate to hit leadoff. I say Dominguez hits 20 homers, steals 25 bases, and wins Rookie of the Year during a breakout campaign.
And man, do they need him with the injuries that have come quickly with the Yankees, with Stanton and with Heel and with Garrett Cole. I mentioned Wells earlier as somebody I like, but Dominguez looks like a player on the rise as well. Let's talk about some of the players we're afraid to draft. And this is no fun to say that Mike Trout is on my fade list. He was the signature baseball player in the league for a long time. It's somehow the Angels had Ohtani and Trout on the same team and never had a winning record. Forget a playoff spot, forget a world championship. They never had a winning record with these two guys, which speaks to baseball being a big roster sport. It also speaks to Trout and Ohtani being hurt a lot. 3 of the last 4 years, if you drafted Trout, he didn't even get to half a season. I think 82 games one of those years. He no longer runs that much. His average took a tumble last year. They're moving him to right field. That's a positive step. I would just make him a DH at this point, but maybe they just want Trout to salvage some of his pride. If you want a high upside outfielder who might get hurt, why not take Byron Buxton 100 picks later? I think he offers 80-85% of Trout's upside, but doesn't offer the downside. So I'm fading Trout. I know Andy might not agree with me when we get to him, but Dalton, you're up next. Give us a player you don't want to draft.
Ketel Marte, like the player, hate his new ADP, though. You're passing on a legit ace as a top 30 pick for a 31-year-old coming off a career year who doesn't run much. Marte hasn't reached double-digit steals since 2019. He's missed an average of 34 games over the last 4 years. He was legitimately awesome last year, helped me on a few fantasy teams. But Marte owns a career 118 WRC plus. Projections have him coming back down closer to 25 home runs this season. Marte's Yahoo ADP was outside the top 100 last year, so he's a fade for me at his new cost.
Yeah, a lot of times when those players rise in ADP, they become risky picks the following season when you have to pay the freight. And you said probably not going to run much. He's at an age where I worry about him a little bit as well. Andy, what's on your fade page?
Well, I'm much too much of a coward to pick somebody who used to be the number one overall pick in fantasy or who is currently the number one fantasy second baseman. I'm gonna go with a player type actually, and we'll use Bryce Terang as sort of the signature player of this type. But I'm just really talking about guys. This could be Victor Robles, this could be Jacob Young. I'm just really talking about guys who only steal bases, right? And he stole 50 bags last year. That's great comfort, right? If you're chasing steals mid, late rounds of a draft. The problem with this type, though, is that they don't do anything else. They are a liability in absolutely every other stat. Single digit homers, 250-ish average, no run production, etc. And like 3 or 4 seasons ago, maybe that's fine. Maybe you can carry a specialist if you legitimately think that they can reach 40 or 50 steals. But steals are everywhere today, absolutely everywhere. An average MLB team stole 121 bases last year. That's up from like 80 just a couple years ago. 24 players stole 30 bases. 50 guys stole 20 bags. So you just don't need to rely on specialists the way you used to.
I'll also point out when you're considering guys like Bryce Terang, you need them to bat first or second. Terang
Yeah.
probably will hit
Oh,
in the
such a
middle
good
of the
point.
lineup. He may even bat seventh, eighth, or ninth. It used to be in the National League, if you were batting seventh or eighth, it was a death sentence for the stolen base because the pitcher was coming up. He was just going to bunt you over anyway. But I'm very batting average sensitive to that. And that's one reason why we talked about Edwards earlier. Not only do we project him for a high batting average, but he's going to bat leadoff. I'm afraid that Terang is going to be somebody who gets hurt by that slot. He doesn't get that extra at bat, and he might even be in a platoon, even though he's a good defender. So many Milwaukee Brewers are. Yeah, I'm going to throw in a bonus fake. I'm just I'm feeling it, and I want to get Dalton's take on this for sure because he's our San Francisco guy. Willie Adames had a monster season. Leaves Milwaukee where they like to run, goes to San Francisco where they basically give you the red light the moment you get to the ballpark. Big contract, changing teams, that the famous Colton and the Wolfman move, and congratulations to Rick Wolf making the Fantasy Hall of Fame, well overdue. They always say when these guys sign these big contracts and change teams, that first year is really a tricky time to get invested. The park is a downgrade for Adames. He's basically not on my board, Dalton. Is that too bold, or are we sharing the same mind here?
Sharing the same mind here. I've been writing about him as a fade. It's not just the switch in parks, but the career year getting paid, but also the steals. The Giants were the least likely team to attempt a stolen base last season when you count for all the factors. So, yeah, I think there's a few things going against Adames there. And that's countered with a rising ADP coming off the big year. So, yeah, I'm out on him. And as for Andy's Terang, Bryce Terang had a 58 WRC plus after the All-Star break last year, 560 OPS. I mean that's at risk of getting benched there. I mean that was a whole second half of at bats too. So I'm with you on him. But yep, Adames and Terang are two fades for me as well.
And one more thing to think about with Adames, shortstop, easily the deepest fantasy
So deep.
position.
Yep.
I'm
So
curious what
deep.
you guys think is. Andy, I'll ask you this first. I think shortstop's the just Disneyland. Anywhere you want to get off, you're going to have a blast. But is there a position that's shallow and has you nervous, or what is the thinnest position of the spots we need to fill?
It's actually really funny, Scott, because I feel like when you and I came of age as fantasy players, there was never a problem at the corners, right?
Mhm.
Like first and third were always, I don't know, that was pretty easy. But we're now in this stretch of years where like all the first base prospects have basically face planted. None of them have necessarily become huge stars, so we haven't really had this new crop of great first basemen. I think first base drops off a cliff. I think third base drops off a cliff after, I don't know, 5, 6 guys. I'm all of a sudden feeling like you can really see the fleas at that position after like 5 or 6 names. And of course, it didn't used to be that way. It used to be that everybody was hitting 30, 35 home runs. Bad players were hitting 30 home runs, and you didn't really have to worry about the position. Now, I think you get to the middle rounds, and all of the names are pretty dicey.
A lot of your MVPs were first basemen too. So
Yep.
if you're at a position early in your draft where it's a tie break between a first baseman, a third baseman, and an outfielder, I would say just take the corner position guy. It's probably a good way to break that tie. Dalton, you want to weigh in here?
It's interesting because it really has flipped. I was going to say first base so sneakily. That's part why I said Paul Goldschmidt in my value one
Hmm.
because I just don't like taking. I love Casas and Vinny P, but they're going when other guys who steal bases in drafts, and then it does get thin later in at first base. But I'll take it further out. It's flipped from the past. Outfield gets thinner too these days because there are so many platoons. If you're in a deeper league and you need to fill 5 outfield spots and then the util, that gets thinner. So really, it's like the opposite of before, where catcher, especially if you're in a one catcher league, is deep, fine, and middle infield, especially Yahoo eligibility, that second and especially short. So it's almost opposite of how it was 10 years ago.
I'm so glad you mentioned platoons. If you're playing daily transaction or maybe even twice a week transaction, you might be able to get a strong side platoon guy, obviously very league wide, league dependent and what your structure is. But if you're making changes once a week, you got to stay away from those platoons. One of my favorite things to do before a draft or a salary cap draft is to go over to roster resource and look at all those lineups and just take note of who's in the platoon. I realize those things can change. Maybe Kerry Carpenter will learn how to hit lefties in Detroit. They'll give him a chance to play full time. But most mixed leagues, just platoons are death. Maybe you take a chance on a guy late and you hope that he gets better, but something to avoid. Well, we're going to let our hair down, theoretically anyway, metaphorically, whatever the right word is. We're going to do that with some bold predictions to get out of here. So, Andy, you said earlier that you're a coward, but we need you to be bold right now.
Yeah, I have become something of an O'Neill Cruz propagandist. I keep taking him everywhere. I am going to say that he delivers top 10 overall fantasy value this season. I think that Cruz is a great low cost alternative to some of those first and second round shortstops. Deep position, I'll grant you that. But last year, even in a season that involved a position switch for Cruz and 180 strikeouts for Cruz, he still went 2020. He was only caught stealing one time on the season. So I feel like there's stolen base upside there. The StatCast data on Cruz is so good that it's almost hilarious. Like top of the charts in all the good stuff. 99th percentile in average exit velocity, 97th percentile in barrel rate, 100th percentile in bat speed, 88th in sprint speed. He does all the stuff. He is an athletic outlier among outliers, and he's just coming into his prime years.
It wasn't that long ago that Ellie De La Cruz versus O'Neill Cruz was kind of like a choose your weapon thing in the NL Central. And then, Ellie, who does strike out a lot, seemed to have kind of moved ahead, and O'Neill Cruz got left behind. I really like the way O'Neill Cruz ended last season. My bold predictions. First of all, I think the Dodgers are going to be a modest fantasy disappointment only because their stars are so expensive in ADP. And I think it's going to be 6 months of load management, as every time somebody hiccups or burps, they're going to go in the IL. They're going to have starts skipped. I think Dave Roberts is going to be a little bit more proactive with not playing his guys into the ground. Although I do like Michael Conforto as a sleeper pick, leaving San Francisco behind. 17 home runs last year on the road, and now he doesn't have to hit in San Francisco anymore. And I talked up the Athletics earlier. I think they might be this year's Tigers, this kind of spunky team that comes out of nowhere. There's a lot of players I want to draft there. The offense gets a better chance. So know your Athletics. I think you're going to want a couple of them on your teams. Dalton, you're always a bold guy, probably the boldest guy we have on staff when it comes to making predictions. So what do you got for us?
A few quick hitters for you. It pains me to agree with Andy, but especially after it's triggering me now. I remember last year you mocked me in a column for when I drafted both Cruzes in the same team, Ellie and O'Neill. But that one,
I would never.
I know it doesn't sound
Couldn't
like
have been
you.
me.
I know it doesn't check out.
It's
But
a shame. It's a shame Jose Cruz the third hasn't hit baseball yet.
But I do agree with Andy's love here, and both Wyatt Langford and O'Neill Cruz are first round fantasy picks in 2026. Spencer Schwellenbach wins the NL Cy Young Award, while Jacob deGrom wins in the AL, and he's this year's Chris Sale. Ryan Walker leads the league in saves, but Ronald Acuna Jr. steals fewer than 20 bases. I hope I'm wrong about that one. Nick Lodolo has a better fantasy season than Hunter Green. And finally, Jared Jones finishes a lot closer to Paul Skeens than their ADPs.
Well, a lot of bold stuff there. I got to have a conversation with the guys about DeGrom. We have him as a really cheap keeper in one of my groups, and I know nobody cares about that, but I've just been dreaming all winter. How many innings would I take right now from DeGrom? If you offered me 110, would I take it? You offered me 100, would I take it? I don't think anybody doubts that he'll be dominant when he pitches. Just how much is he going to pitch? Do you have the stomach to take him? ADP says he's a third or fourth round pick. He may even go in the second round to some people with their hair on fire. Dalton's already weighed in here. Andy, do you have a take on DeGrom this season?
Well, we know that the upside with DeGrom is sensational, right? And I think it's exactly where Dalton pegs it. It's a Cy Young. I actually also think that the value among pitchers, and I don't get a lot of brand name starters necessarily, but I kind of think that the value among pitchers is with the players where we've priced in this huge injury concern.
Mm.
Because you know what? They're all injury risks. We can't identify in advance which guys are definitely getting hurt. So I see these discounts on like Glasnow and DeGrom, and like DeGrom could maybe be a top three pitcher just on pure stuff. There's no real reason that Jacob DeGrom is not like a top three fantasy starter. It's just we've built in so many worries about him re-injuring himself because we've seen it already. We know he throws 100. I love guys like that. And I'm not going to get him in a draft because he still goes too early for me in a draft. But I've been in some salary cap drafts so far where the bidding just stops at like 10, 11, $12 on some of these guys who are obviously great, but we've built in some huge injury risk, and I'll take those guys at that price every time.
The second time you've referenced running backs and starting pitchers being similar in fantasy, I just want to give a shout out to Sammy Reed, who did a Twitter thread back when it was Twitter a few years ago on this. You can find it easily if you search for it, and it was so good, Andy. I thought it deserved an FSWA award on the spot. I'm sure you probably had something to do with it not getting the recognition it deserved. But yeah, we were always comparing. We just had a football season, right, where the running backs didn't get hurt. All these
Yeah.
older running backs that we've been conditioned not to draft or not to trust. A lot of them were traded to better teams and better situations. But wouldn't it be nice to have a pitching season like that where we looked back and said, oh, geez, it wasn't that bad with the injuries. We know they've taken back the workloads and everything, but I would love to have a season like that. This is the end of our show, but I'm just going to do one thing off script. I didn't ask anybody this ahead of time. I'll even go first. You can think of an answer. Let's just name a World Series champion. I'm don't want to pick the Dodgers. If my life depended on it, if my mortgage depended on it, I would pick the Dodgers. Can't pick the Mets. I can't have Salfino that happy. So I'm going to pick the Philadelphia Phillies as the 2025 World Champions. Andy, what say you?
Man, I think the Phillies are a great call. I'm gonna actually throw out the Red Sox because I'm still
Mm.
I'm still thinking back to your hype for Christian Campbell and just the idea that they got three guys out there that are like ready to hit in the majors. If anybody struggles at the major league level, that's ammunition for trades. That's just a midseason roster boost. I love what the Red Sox have done.
And that Crochet trade reminded me so much of the Chris Sale trade. It was
Yep.
fun at the beginning. It was not fun at the end of it. I joked that he probably ran every red light to sign the contract extension that they offered him. Of course, he's since had a nice rebound season with the Braves. Dalton, you get the last word here. Give us a champion and anything else you want to tell us.
I'll go with the Braves. They're coming off kind of a nightmare season, a lot of injuries, and the players who weren't injured had awful seasons, due for a lot of regression. And maybe Strider is healthy in the second half or in the playoff run, have some depth in pitching too. So I like the Braves to bounce back. But yeah, it's crazy what the Dodgers are doing. As an NL West fan, it is frustrating how seemingly every single free agent is signing there, and they enter as the obvious favorites. But the thing is, the sample size when you get into the postseason for baseball, absolutely anything can happen. So give me the Braves.
For sure. Yeah, that Braves team just reminds me so much of that the Braves team. The Dodgers team reminds me so much of that Braves team in the 90s that always made the postseason, only one championship. This Dodgers team has won two, but the pandemic season was kind of weird. Well, this was a blast, Dalton. Andy, thanks so much. For producer Dan Harris, I'm Scott Pianowski. You know what's really fun? Drafting a fantasy baseball team. Why don't you sign up with us at Yahoo today, and let's spend the next 6 months together. Yahoo Fantasy is back for 2025 gamers. It's about time to start that long journey towards a coveted 2025 Fantasy Baseball Trophy. You can create or join a league with your crew today. Start preparing for your draft. Don't have a league to play in? Want to get in another league? Join one of our public leagues and start drafting instantly today. Head to yahoo.com/fantasy baseball to get started. Make this your championship season. I'll see you at the parade.